Good morning, good morning. I'm on my own today. Connor, our producer, has a day off. Outrageous, isn't it? I have no idea who agreed to the fact he could do that. No, that's a joke, Connor. It's his 9-year anniversary with his girlfriend today. Congratulations. Hope you have a fantastic day, fantastic weekend. And we don't have a guest today either. So it's just me. But Connor has kindly left me some questions. I'm actually going to do Instagram live at the same time. Bear with me. I've done this before. This is exciting. Yeah. So now we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, it seems. I think because I'm on my own, it's going to work a little bit better because there are some challenges with live streaming across onto Instagram from any of these third-party platforms. We use Streamyard. And although you can run your stream across to Instagram, it doesn't really work properly because some of them are horizontal and Instagram is vertical, so it cuts bits out and it's all a bit weird. We also just applied for LinkedIn Live, so you should get that in about 6 weeks' time. I think that should be really useful too, because I think there's lots of you who hang out quite a lot on LinkedIn and aren't seeing this because we're in the wrong places for you. So, yeah, I'm pressing all the buttons today as well, which should be exciting. Connor has kindly left me some questions to answer you all about guesting, all about hosting, and how to be a great host. So that should be fun. Right, let's see what we do here. I think at this point I normally say, let's get into it. Welcome. Friday, September 11th. This is the OneFinePlay Ask Me Anything that is likely to be rebranded from next week as Sound Advice with James. Just because we've realised that there's an opportunity here to do more than just asking me questions. We're really excited about the idea of getting on creators who are experienced and have knowledge and can share their stories of what they've learned podcasting. And also, I'm really interested, I thought we had a long conversation internally about doing review videos. We see so many questions in Facebook groups like, what's the best mic? What's the best way of recording? You know, what are you using for video and so on? I'm like, well, we could review all the products, but what might be more interesting is to get the founders of some of these products onto the show to tell their story, to hear what they're doing, how they're innovating, plans for the future. So we're going to do that starting, I think, next Thursday with the founder of a really cool recording product, a bit like Zoom, but much better, records locally. It's called Welder. So I think he'll be on next Thursday. So yeah, wow, it's kind of hard when you're on your own, eh? I've got all these buttons to press. So before we get into today's show, I just want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about the plans here at OneFinePlay, what we're doing, why we started this live stream. A couple of reasons. Look how bad my posture is. I noticed that yesterday. I found my shoulders down like this all the time. I sit like that. Look at that. Look at that side. Ooh, versus that side. That's not good, is it? I've been running a lot. Anyway, it needs to be more like that. It's hard to maintain. I'm clearly really lopsided. Maybe it's the chair. Who knows? Anyway, plans at OneFinePlay. We're actually making a move soon to be your online virtual podcast producer. We have seen an opportunity in the market. There are so many podcast production companies. There are so many tools for recording, for monetizing, for growing, for this, that, the other. And the one thing that we think really helps podcasters to grow their shows and to smash the podcasting industry is to have a producer on board. It's a bit like going to the gym. Like a personal trainer can make all the difference to your journey. They don't do it for you, but they can help you and guide you along the way. So we do that quite a lot for clients at the moment. We make shows for all kinds of different people. And I guess one of our roles in the process is producer. So we'll have an exec producer or a series producer, and then episode producers and assistant producers and researchers, and and then there's the creative team as well. And then when you go outside of these bigger budget shows and you speak to individuals who often are making amazing content that really should be shared, the thing that, they're always focused on kit and editing and social content and cut downs and, and I get all that stuff, but I think a producer could really add value. So what we're doing is we're building a product that will allow you to get access to those to producer knowledge, the craft and the graft involved in having a producer on your show, and you're going to be able to access it at essentially affordable rates. So that's coming towards the end of the year. The reason for starting this was really just to start learning and understanding from you guys about what you're interested in, what things as a producer we can really improve on in order to add value as the product launches. No name for the product yet. It's going to be alongside editing services, and we're going to continue to do what we've always done. And we've got plans for a new studio as and when COVID allows, which could be a while yet. So yeah, exciting times in the future. To follow along on the journey, you can follow us anywhere across social at OneFinePlay. It would mean the world to me if you could smash that subscribe button. If you want to hit the notification bell so you know when we're posting, when we're going live, when we're doing stuff, that would also be great. Leave a comment. Love to hear from you. You can also reach out to us at our email address is live@onefineplay.com. Otherwise, let's get into today's show. The topic Connor has given me to talk about today is podcast hosts and how to be a great host. I think it's more of a skill than some people think it is. So, Connor, what have you written here? Oh yeah, I've been listening to a podcast called Call Her Daddy. You may or may not have heard of it. There was some controversy around it earlier on in the year. It's from Barstool. It's an American show featuring sort of like a one-woman show now, I guess. And I started giving it a listen because it was charting in the UK. And I'm not embarrassed, but I love it. It's amazing, and it's such a good show. Now, it's given me the idea to do I want to break down some of the better podcasts out there and really explain to you why I think they're as successful as they are. So I'm going to do that in look at that, he's even left me a nice little banner to put up. So that's going to come soon. We're going to make a proper video, none of this live stuff. We're going to actually make it and edit it and, share that probably on YouTube. And I'm going to break down why I think Call Her Daddy is as powerful and successful as it is. Because there is so much to that show that you can learn. If you can get past the shock factor and the fact that the conversations, the things she talks about, the way she describes stuff, the way she integrates her sponsors, the way she talks to her audience, the way she builds a narrative across episodes, to she literally calls them cliffhangers. She leaves you with a cliffhanger so you come back to the next episode. It's incredible. I'm looking forward to making that video. We will share it with you soon. Anyway, this is hard on your own, I'm used to having all that company. Hosting. Now, lots of people think they can start a podcast, and that's cool. I get that. But there is definitely a skill to being a podcast host. It's not as easy as it looks, for sure. As you can tell from me presenting this live recording is also a skill. I can't stop talking. If I stop to think, it's going to go quiet. And when you're hosting, you have similar challenges. You're often having to listen to someone talk to you whilst you think about the next question. So the first thing that Connor suggests that I talk to you about is, what are some practical tips for improving your skills as a podcast host? Well, the first is to practice. Obviously, don't just jump straight into it. Take constructive feedback, I think, is really important. I am obviously, as you can tell from my personality, pretty good at dishing out harsh criticism. Constructive criticism. I think that if you hear the same comment more than a couple of times, you should take it seriously. I think that it's super important to be planned. We notice, as we have a studio and we see people come in and out 2 or 3 times a day, people who have got pages and pages of notes and have researched their guests and have thought through questions and have got 10 questions they want to ask and have backup 10 questions are so much better than those people who just hope that they're going to do a good job and they're going to think about the next thing to ask the guest. There's nothing worse. Like, you see, the art of being a podcast host is to turn what's basically an interview into a conversation. I'm positioning all these questions from an interviewing perspective because that's what most of you guys do. It's just interview. How you build around that, how you put your intros and outros and your signposts and everything else inside your show. They're normally scripted, presented around afterwards. So I don't think hosting, it's just more about presenting skills. But from a hosting perspective, when you're asking people questions, I think it's really, there is definitely an art to it. So people who have plans do so much better a job because it just makes it that little bit easier for you to think about what you might want to say next with prompts, as well as listening and answering what the other person is saying to you, because really what you're trying to do is take an interview, which is question, answer, and turn it into a conversation, because that's so much more interesting for the listener to consume. But there is, of course, it's kind of unnatural, and also often you find a guest is coming on because they think that they're going to get to do all the talking and they're going to tell their story. And one of the challenges that we find is that we're often trying to tell a specific narrative and the guest is taking it off in a weird direction, so we need to bring it back centrally. And there's definitely a skill to that without interrupting them, but guiding the conversation. It also, as a host, involves quite a lot of being able to read the other person, to guess quite quickly how good they are. Some people are much more media trained than others, so you might find, I can't do it without naming names, but there are types of people who are brilliant at being interviewed because they do it. They're on stage. We had an actress on a show the other day. She's a comedian. She's so quick and she's so natural at being asked questions and presenting and have cameras in her face that she basically interviewed the host, and then the host was kind of on the back foot with trying to make sense of it, by his own admission. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that. So how he overcame that was just to constantly bring it back to the key topics that they were talking about, which in this case was dyslexia. But then the next day he interviewed someone who was he's essentially like an inventor, and he was getting nowhere. So he really had to work much harder with smaller questions and making them feel comfortable and finding familiarity in order to open up the conversation. So the practical tips for me are definitely planning. Another thing that I think is really good is to spend as much time with your guest as possible. So Joe Rogan is known for spending the whole day with his guest. He invites them over to the place that he records, and then always do an activity, like they go shooting or they mess around, they do whatever, and he spends a good period of time with them, getting to know them, getting to feel comfortable. Then he does the interview, and then they go for dinner or whatever. So there's a whole experience built into that process, which is how he gets such great interviews, and that's also how he gets repeat guests. And the fact is Joe Rogan, I guess that helps. So we often build a 30-minute period into the beginning of an interview where we just let the host and the guest talk, because that familiarity and that warming them both up really makes a difference. So that would be another tip for you from that perspective. Don't just jump in cold, because it's difficult. You're not going to get the most out of your guest. But that leads on to another really interesting question, which is should a host interrupt their guest? Well, this is a difficult one. It's very personality driven. It's very stylistic. It's a case of how you manage it. So we make a podcast for Ross Kemp, and he, I'm sure won't mind me saying, took a little bit of criticism on social for his interruptions. Now, I'm a big fan of it, and I think it's fine, because I think that having a conversation is a really good, important thing to do, and sometimes you want to keep your guest on course, or to move the conversation on, or whatever. And so, sometimes you don't have any choice. I guess it's just how you do it, and when you do it, and where you do it. And see, this is a funny one. I'm just turning my WhatsApp off because it's distracting. So that isn't helping this morning. So when it comes to interrupting the guest, I think you've just got to find the right time, and you've really got to believe in the decisions that you've made around interrupting. So I think it needs to be a conscious thing. Like, you know, Gary Vaynerchuk, who I'm a big fan of, interrupts all the time, and he got lots of feedback for that, and now he calls himself out about it. He goes, I know people have got to be interrupting, but, and I think that's a really, you know, if you can show self-awareness for it, that's great. I also think that you've got to make a conscious decision about it, because you might get heat from it, but you've got to think about the bigger picture of your show. So often you see people are interrupting for good reason, but then the community say that they aren't so keen on the interruptions, but the community isn't making the show, and the community isn't trying to build themselves in a certain sector. They might be interested in the guest, and that's great, but they can go and find the guest talking in other places if they want, as far as I'm concerned. Like, you're not here making a podcast as a host, putting in all the time, money, effort, and love to just create a platform for other people's narratives. They can go and do that for themselves. You will need to keep it on track with the thing that you're trying to discuss, and if that means you need to butt in to make an important point or keep the conversation going, then that's what you should do. Should you stick to the script or go with the flow when interviewing someone or hosting a podcast? Well, I think pretty much this is down to how much post-production and editorial you're going to do. So I know lots of people are not that great with the post-production and the editing. And in which case, I would say probably try and stick with your script. You probably want 3 beats to a podcast. So in a nutshell, you want a beginning, a middle, and an end. You want it to go somewhere. So, you know, I had Sam Sethi on the show on Wednesday, and he was talking about how his podcast has 3 sections. He talks about what they're doing now, what they did to get there, and what they're going to do in the future. So he sits pretty closely to those 3 sections, and then he has 3 questions within each of those sections. So he approaches his podcast with basically 9 or 10 key questions, and then he has an intro and an outro. And he sticks quite closely to that. The familiarity of it always being the same is something that listeners like, so they become familiar with, and that allows them to become a fan of the show, and I think that's really important. But sticking to the script specifically, I think you need to keep the structure together, but how the content within it goes, I mean, that's kind of entirely up to you. Depends on what researched you are, I suppose, doesn't it? Like, you know, again, if you've got really important things you want to talk about that you found out in your research, then make sure you get them into the show. But if the guest takes it in an interesting direction, I mean, you never know where it's going to go to you. So for me, though, from experience, the closer to your script or your plan or your structure that you stick, normally, the better you end up. Morning, Jack. It's funny seeing all these people on Instagram that this is the first Instagram live I've done. Vaz, hello. Kanch, hello. That is, I think, Sarah. Is that right? I think maybe my random Instagram knowledge. So that's my thoughts on sticking to the script. I think that you need to be as you need a little bit of opportunity to let things move around with what the guest wants to talk about. But, you know, if you're making a show about, let's take The Invisible Gift about dyslexia that we're making at the moment. You know, the other day you talked to an entrepreneur, and, you know, the host is also an entrepreneur. And at one point, the conversation was moving off into just how great it is to be not how great it is to be an entrepreneur, but, you know, the standard entrepreneurial, you've done amazing stuff. How did you achieve this? But the point of the show is all about how dyslexia has become a force for good in their lives, and how they've managed to achieve these extraordinary things by using dyslexia for good. So every question sort of needs to relate back to that. Otherwise, you've just got a generic podcast like everyone else has got about, you know, you're amazing and you do great things in the entrepreneurial space. So if that's, you know, what your show is about, I think you've got to stick really close to that heart. But if not, then, you know, if it's looser than that, there's lots of different show topics, then it's entirely up to you. So this is an interesting question. Should you develop the character of the host, or should the focus be on the guest? Well, for me, it's about the character of the host. So we talk about 3 key components to a good quality podcast. Number 1, you need creative bravery. So that means it's got to be bigger and better than just I'm going to interview XYZ. We talked about this the other day on this show. You know, you've got most people, and I actually made a LinkedIn post about it recently, if you go check that out, but it goes into more depth. But basically, you know, most people come to me and say, hey, I want to start a podcast. And what follows is I'm going to interview blah, 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 blah. And then that is just a list of people their ego is proudest of knowing. And there's not really anything that ties them together. You need something like a North Star, basically, to tie your episodes together, ideally to connect your episode narratives, the episode narrative together so that there's an arc across your season. And then ideally, you need to be creatively brave. So do something different, whether it's a live or whether it's a game show element or whether you've got segments of your show or whether you're doing a review show or you're like just something that's not just question and answer, because it's pretty much done to death. Plus, you, regardless of what guests you can get, you can search the guests on the Apple Podcasts app and listen to just the guests. So then you're just playing host and you're not building a brand or a story or experience, which is what your podcast could do, should be. If you think of your podcast as an experience, not just audio files, you're just going to get so much further with how you build it creatively. So number one, you need creative bravery. Number two, you need commitment to audience development. So this isn't just, I'm going to interview people, people are going to watch it, they're going to go, oh my God, he's such an expert, I'm going to phone him up. That isn't going to happen. They're not just going to go, oh, you've got a podcast, you must know everything, I'm going to give you my business. But you've got to work to develop your audience. We are, you know, like just this live stream, you go onto YouTube and look how many views I'm getting, like 4, 8, 10. It's demoralizing. You go onto Instagram, look how many followers I've got. Not that many. My growth. You go on Social Blade, look at the growth of the OneFinePlay Instagram channel. It's flat. We're making content every day. This is hard. You've got to find, but we're not doing anything to develop audience. So you've got to work hard for that. You've got to, you know, webinars, get email addresses, do a listener inbox, all that kind of stuff. That's really going to help develop your audience. And then the third thing is that you need to build a character in your show. You've got to have a character because people love think of any Netflix show that you watch, you end up falling in love with one of the characters and you want to see what happens to that person through the show. That's what becomes more important than the overarching show itself. You want to know what happens to that person's story. So you need characters in a podcast. That's why we're making this stuff, so that we end up, when we launch the new business, we've got essentially like a name or a face of the brand in me as a producer, so that when people then come into the business, they'll see all the content that I've made as the as the face of a business that like is supported behind it. So I think that, you know, and then there are key things that you know. So you know about my personality. Hopefully you think I understand quite a bit about podcasting. I'm willing to give away everything I know for free without any expectation of return from anyone about anything. I'm pretty punchy. I'm direct in what I say. I don't mess around. I'm conscious of that. But those are personality traits that I want to be known for. You've got to stand for something. And I think there are so many podcasts out there where you can listen to the whole episode and you can fall in that trap that the guest is coming on and they're going to do 95% of the talking. So they're going to do all the heavy lifting. You're going to just ask a few questions and we're going to go, hey, on this week's show, I've got so-and-so. And at the end, you're going to say, oh, thanks for being on the show. That was really interesting. See you next week. Peace. And you haven't given enough in the show. And so people are just going to forget about you. It's not memorable enough. So I think you've really got to develop that character. That's why Call That Daddy that I was talking about earlier on, is such a great podcast. It's such a great example of character development. Think the Joe Rogan Experience. You know about Joe. He likes MMA. He's like pro-weed. He's got strong political views. Like, you know about him. And if you listen to his interviews, he does a lot of talking. He does like 35, 40% of the talking. And that makes a big difference because you get to know him, you get to become familiar with him, and it's him that you're going to become a fan of. I was listening to Impulsive, the podcast by Logan Paul yesterday. I listen to some shit, don't I? Anyway, I was listening to Impulsive, I love it. And I can't remember what episode it was, but they were talking about the importance of building, like, they talk about content creators, and they're like, everything that you do, the way to get successful is to build offline, non-digital. So they're like, you know, Logan Paul's merch line, he turned over $34 million in his Maverick clothing line last year alone. So like their merch line, they're doing TV, they're looking at radio, they're writing books, they're doing stuff outside of just great content, because monetizing this and growing this has become so hard because it's so saturated. So developing character for me, absolutely crucial, because it's the only way you're going to grow. You've got to think of this as a show, basically. So name 2 brilliant podcast hosts, one you've worked with and one you haven't. Well, Rebecca is watching this live stream, so I'm going to say she's a brilliant podcast host, absolute specialist. So we make a podcast called called And Breathe. It's all about breath work and the power of your breath and what it can do to transform your life. The host, Rebecca, is an amazing human anyway, but she also is a brilliant host. She cares a lot. She really understands her guests. She really knows her subject. Lots of passion goes into it. She does lots of work on researching. She has a brilliant style that suits the show really well. And she is a great podcast host. You get to know her. You get to like her. She has a good long 10-minute, 8-minute section, I'd say, at the beginning where she talks and you get to become familiar with her. She also gives additional breathwork exercises as part of her podcast, so you can learn and find out more about her. I think that is a great example of a brilliant podcast host. One I haven't worked with, I don't know. There are so many great podcast hosts out there that I would love to work with. It's funny, like all the people that we get to work with, like the talent, so the celebrities. So like we're working with Cara Delevingne or with Judge Rinder or with Ross Kemp or Jack Harry's the YouTuber. They're just consummate professionals and they make it look easy. And because they make it look easy, it's different because that's what they've done all their lives. So, you know, I like the Louis Theroux podcast for the fact that I'm a fan of Louis. I hate the podcast because it's BBC trash, but it's just they're so lazy. I can't wait for the day, the downfall of the BBC in podcasting. That will be a great day. And it's happening, it's coming. If you go look at the charts, the content creators, the YouTubers, they're coming at it. The old guard are in trouble, and I love it. It spurs me on every day to keep on working for the underdog. Those fuckers, they're dead. They're so complacent. They're so lazy. The quality of their shows is so bad. They have no imagination. Drives me bonkers. Anyway, that's probably killed all my BBC contracts for the future ever, but good really good shit. So what else has he asked me to talk about? Scripting, interrupting, developing your character, skills. I think that's about it for today. Look, it's 9:43. We said this would be half an hour. Guys, I have enjoyed this, talking to myself. It's a bit weird, definitely needs practice. Great to have the Instagram as well. I have no idea how we're going to do this on a more regular basis because with a guest it doesn't work. We're going to be doing these live streams Monday to Friday for the foreseeable future. I've committed to doing 100, and I think this is number 7. They are going well. The progress is slow. If you look at the numbers, it's demoralizing, but I'm getting outreach. We've got 3 weeks worth of guests ahead. We're doing some different formats, changing the name. I'm excited about where it's going. It would mean the world to me, as I say. If you know anyone who listens to podcasts or is thinking about starting a podcast or has one and wants to learn about growth and monetization, any questions they've got, most days of the week when Connor, the producer, is here, he is lining guests up and we're answering their questions. live@OneFinePlay.com is our email address. You can find us on all the social channels, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, whatever, @OneFinePlay. It's been emotional. I will see you in the next one on Monday. Peace.